Good afternoon and welcome to The Appeal Live, a co-production of Now This and The Appeal. I'm Alana Sivan. In 2016, Inez Bordeaux was working 3 minimum wage part-time jobs when she couldn't pay her court-ordered restitution. She had to pay restitution as a condition of her probation, and she was on probation because half a decade earlier she had overdrawn her unemployment benefits in order to pay for her kids' child care. And so her probation was revoked, a warrant was issued, and $25,000 bail was set on her case. Bail that she could not pay. And so she was sent to the Workhouse, a medium security prison in St. Louis, Missouri. And she said that the moment she walked in, quote, "You can just feel the hopelessness. You can feel the desperation." And that's not just because the Workhouse is a prison. It's also because the conditions there are beyond inhumane. Everywhere you look, there is black mold, rats, roaches, no mental health services, water leaking from the ceiling that people incarcerated would often collect with trash cans, wait for the water to accumulate, and then throw it into the shower. And now, Bordeaux had heard about these conditions before. She has said that being Black in St. Louis means you either have gone to the Workhouse yourself or you know someone who has. But she always assumed that these stories were exaggerated. It wasn't until she saw them with her own eyes that she knew just how horrific this place was. And so once she got out, she committed herself to being part of the movement to close it down. And now she's a leader in the Close the Workhouse campaign, which is urging the mayor to close this decrepit prison once and for all. But Mayor Crewsons, who was elected in 2017, has refused to do that. And this comes as no surprise to the people of St. Louis because during her administration, she has shown little regard for the most marginalized people living there. She's shown little regard for people who are Black and brown and poor. And in addition to refusing to close the Workhouse, she has also dismantled encampments of people who are experiencing homelessness during the pandemic. And last year, instead of listening to the calls of people in St. Louis demanding police reform, she instead decided to broadcast the names of protesters on Facebook Live. And so last year, Crewsons announced she would not seek a second term in office, which leaves 4 candidates who are hoping to win her seat in the April general election. And so here today to discuss the race's implications for the future of St. Louis are Kayla Reed, co-founder and executive director of Action St. Louis, and Jacki Langum, director of advocacy for the Arch City Defenders. Thank you both so much for being here on The Appeal Live. Really excited to have you both.
No, thanks for having us.
Thank you. So I want to start out by talking to both of you about the place St. Louis is in now and the conditions that its current mayor have left the next mayor to inherit. So what sort of legacy has Mayor Crewsons left behind? And Kayla, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so, Mayor Crewsons won an election in 2017 that was split between 5 candidates. And so she picked up less votes in North City, where is a predominantly Black part of St. Louis, than any other candidate running for mayor at that time. She was elected by, the more conservative voters in this city who saw the Ferguson uprising and the protests that had taken place in 2014 and 15, and wanted to push back with more law and order pro-police candidate. And she won with a very marginal victory. She won by 888 votes, with most of those only winning because the vote was split between the other candidates who were all Black. And so her legacy has started with the message that she didn't win the majority of the votes in the city of St. Louis. She didn't win a sizable votes of the Black population of the city of St. Louis. And she's continued to ignore them, our voices, Black people's voices in this city over the last 4 years. It is not just the Workhouse that stains her legacy. It's her commitment to uplifting private interests and wealthy benefactors' agendas over that of the needs of community, whether or not it was attempting to privatize our airport or force the city and county into a merger that didn't include the voices of the people, or ignoring the continued police abuses against community members, or her denial of the reality that both jails are producing inhumane conditions and folks' rights are routinely violated in the city of St. Louis. So she is walking out and is currently a lame duck mayor who has a legacy of failing the people and failing to protect the people and failing to invest resources in our communities.
Jacki, go ahead.
Well, it's hard to follow Kayla after that. I think it was quite thorough. I think especially important for us as we move forward is what's going to happen after the pandemic and the state that St. Louis will be in. And I think, as Kayla said, the legacy is one of supporting those private interests, the folks with money, and continued criminalization of race and poverty. And so I think the next mayor, these candidates have an opportunity to build a new future for St. Louis and rise above what she's leaving behind.
Both talked a lot about how, this mayor has really ignored the voices and the needs of Black voters. And so looking at the future election and seeing what the next mayor will have to deal with, talk a little bit about what the sort of challenges are that this new mayor will have when it comes to addressing those failures. And
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of things that St. Louis needs to address, right? And some of this is a product of this current administration, and some of this preceded her. And so, none of the Ferguson Commission report, which was a report that was put together after the uprising, many of those recommendations have just sat in that report on a shelf. And the organizations like Action St. Louis and Arch City Defenders have been advocating for marginalized communities. And so we have to address the needs of the issues of the people who are facing the issues we fight for every day. Folks who are currently unhoused, which Mayor Crewsons' policy has been to just over incarcerate and criminalize people who are unhoused in the city and not invest in their well-being. We know that our jail population is starting to tick back up because there's a reliance on refusing to give bail now. In previous administrations, it was setting high bails. And we know that the pandemic has caused extreme economic devastation for communities that were already suffering under the weight of policies that had divested from our neighborhoods. And so we are steps away from a housing crisis, where we are going to see thousands of people, majority Black people and Black families, be evicted from their neighborhoods. And that's going to fuel displacement in this region. And that's not even addressing the public safety plight, that we know we still have a police department that is not accountable, that is not protecting and serving. Our crime rates are still very high, and we're continuing to overinvest in that system and leave the communities that have been neglected under-resourced.
When I hear you talk about all of these things, I think what's great about the both of you is that you're not just critics of the mayor, but you're also folks who have developed a plan and have been part of a huge process to develop a plan. So talk to our viewers about that plan. And this time we can start with Jacki.
I think what's especially important about the People's Plan is that it's just that. It was created by the people. It is an opportunity for us and for the community to put something forward that is rooted in their struggle and what they want and what they need, and not what special interests or private interests need or lobbyists need. And it's an opportunity to consider how we're going to reinvest in our public safety, how we're going to make St. Louis home, how we're going to look at what is considered public infrastructure, and how we're going to invest in our communities. It is an opportunity that we haven't had in St. Louis in quite some time, and it's something that's going to give us the ability to hold someone accountable, for the new mayor to know that the people has a plan that we expect the new mayor to put into place.
Yeah, we think that these are tangible demands, right? So these are not pie in the sky policies. This is about making sure that this city is coming into the new millennium finally, and we're expanding access to affordable transportation. We're building affordable housing. We're protecting tenants. We're investing in the social services that we've ignored. We are civilianizing parts of the police department that fuel criminalization and violence. And we're prioritizing resources and policies that mitigate harm against communities that continue to be persecuted under the systemic inequality that St. Louis has produced. And so we are hopeful that folks will go to People's Plan, STL.org, look at the 4 pillars, making STL home, which again is about housing, healthcare, jobs, livability. We want to have broadband for our children. We want to have affordable housing. We want to have environmental justice. We talk about funding our future, where we allocate more money into the budget that goes into our children's and our communities. We talk about building an inclusive democracy. Half the time, most people in this city have no idea what's happening in room 200, which is the mayor's office in the city hall, or what's happening in our legislative body at the Board of Aldermen. And so we want to increase transparency and accountability and bring people into decision making around the things that impact our lives. And of course, we want to reimagine public safety, where the public is actually safe and invested in. And those things come from over 40 organizations have signed on to the People's Plan. We did a survey where over hundreds of participants completed this survey. All of the results of the survey, all of the partner organizations are on that website. And it's not saying that Action in our city are doing all of that work, that these 40 organizations, this is work that's already happening. This is work that people are already fighting to get accomplished. And we're coming together because we know that we're stronger together.
And when you talk about this plan and framing it in terms of public safety, I think that's really important, because we've seen how St. Louis hasn't been a safe place for so many people. In fact, the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department has the highest rate of police killings by population of any police department of the 100 largest U.S. cities. Mm-hmm. And so my next question is for Jacki. From 2009 to 2019, at least 179 people have been killed by police or while in jail custody. So why is police violence in St. Louis so high, and what does the next mayor need to do to address it? And by the way, Kayla, you can jump in as well.
The reason it's so high is because that's the culture. That's the culture that they've had for decades, and it's acceptable behavior. And the other thing is that you don't have an opportunity to hold people accountable because of the powers that are in play. And so it's important to really think about the impact that has on the community. And when there's that record-breaking police violence, how the relationships are going to be between those who are in power and those who are driving around in police cars every day in communities, and how people see them and how they react to that kind of environment. And it is one of fear, and it is one of discomfort. And all that we're doing is continuing to fund that. We're not holding people accountable for their actions. We're not able to be successful in any of our investigations, and we're not able to get any information about what's happening in these situations. And so it's incredibly important that we look at how we're funding the police department and where the money's not going. That is more important for those funds overall.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll just add that, when it comes to violence, people often say that poverty is the grandfather of crime, right? And so we know that over a fourth of the people who live in the city live below the poverty line, and they're hyper concentrated in areas that have not seen the level of investment as more wealthy parts of the city of St. Louis. And so we have simultaneously divested the resources from these communities and overinvested in policing them. And the police come in and they extract more resources from communities that are already strained. And there's no place for relief. There's no institution or organization that the city is funding that is taking care of the basic needs of people. And then we start to see violence tick up. It is not by accident that St. Louis had its quote unquote deadliest year when it comes to gun violence during a pandemic, where we know that more people are facing eviction, more people are unable to feed their families, unemployment is through the roof, and our state does not provide resources to keep people in their homes and to keep families fed. That these things are connected. And what we continue to do is ignore those statistics, ignore those facts, ignore those realities, maintain that talking point, but invest our dollars into policing. We spend too much money on police in St. Louis. Part of the reason that we have one of the highest per capita incidents of police violence is because we have one of the highest per capita of police, period. We over police, we overfund them, we have too many of them, and that those dollars are being wasted and are actually fueling more violence in communities that are already suffering. And so the idea of divesting and cutting that budget down and moving those resources into the community is actually about things that make people feel safe. When you go into wealthy neighborhoods, there are not cops on every corner, but there are resources for those families that are in those communities, and we need to mirror that structure. We need to invest in the resources and increase the resources that go into these communities. And we would see with that an instant decrease in the level of violence that is happening. And those two things they're linked. The more we invest into police, we're adding to the probability that there will be more violence.
I'm here. It's so interesting to hear from both of you that the reason there's so much violence is because we invest too much in police.
And we underinvest in people, right? And so our police union in this city has made an endorsement of candidates who are running for mayor. And their endorsement is in alignment with candidates who seek to continue the type of policing and funding the type of policing that has led to these horrible statistics that we over jail people, we over police people, and people are left brutalized and dead because there is no accountability. And part of the ways that you wouldn't keep giving a bad teacher a salary if they weren't educating our children. You wouldn't extend a surgeon's contract if they were killing people on the table. And year after year, we see that the police they're failing to decrease violence. They're failing to arrest the folks who are perpetuating violence, and they're creating violence themselves. And we continue to increase the budget. And that is the definition of insanity.
Is doing the same thing over again and expecting different results.
Exactly.
I think it also, what message are we sending to the community that we're willing to continue to invest in the police budget? And in the meantime, we're closing schools in areas of the city because of enrollment. We are not assisting the unhoused. We have shelter providers that are volunteering their services to provide shelter for the unhoused during the coldest nights of winter. But yet we continue to invest in the police department, and the community supports, and the Police Officers Association supports those candidates who are willing to continue to do that.
So I want to talk a little bit about the candidates. So I'd love to hear from both of you. You've sort of outlined what you think the next mayor should be doing and what the mayor candidate should be committing to. How have you seen candidates respond to that? And what are your overall impressions?
Yeah, so I'll take this question because, so Action St. Louis has Action St. Louis Power Project is our advocacy arm. And we believe that this next mayor's race we're at a fork in the road as a city. We can decide to double down on kind of the status quo politics that have led us to extreme inequality, where someone's life expectancy is lower if they live north of Del Mar versus south of Del Mar. Or we can think about something that could be transformative. We can think about a leader who's been responsive to people, not private interests, who's been responsive to organizations that are fighting on behalf of the most marginalized, who has a plan around housing, who has a plan around the unhoused, who has a plan around bringing businesses into the community and supporting small businesses' growth in this community, who is thinking about the infrastructure our region needs. That these issues shouldn't just be stump speeches, but there should be plans, and that people's work, their experience should be taken into account, but also the deals that they've made in the past. There are candidates who have taken dark money, who have fought to privatize our public assets, who have fought to move more money away from services that we need in our community, and who are saying that they have the most experience to be mayor. We don't believe that that's true. There are currently 4 candidates, and in November of 2020, we passed Proposition D, which is approval voting, which allows you on March 2nd to vote for the candidates who align with your politics. If that's one candidate, that's fine. If it's 2 or 3, you can vote, you can approve all of them. And the top 2 vote getters go into a runoff in April, and who wins that runoff on April 6th becomes the mayor. In April, also in the city of St. Louis, the budget starts its process again. And so you have to think about where you want to see money in your community and which candidate is speaking to those ideals. Action St. Louis and Arch City have co-sponsored a debate on the candidates, just like the appeal that's on the People's Plan website as well. We've asked each of those candidates, all 4 candidates, questions that are around the People's Plan, around those infrastructure and investment questions. Those answers can be found on peoplesplanstl.org as well. Action St. Louis believes in educating voters, that too long politicians have believed that the more money they have is the more likely that it is likely that they will win the race. And what we want to combat is that we are trying to be an educated electorate, and we know that this seat is too important to not walk into the ballot box with all the information we need.
So I want to talk a little bit about the Workhouse. Because part of the People's Plan and part of what you've all asked candidates is whether or not they're committed to closing the Workhouse, because we know right now that the current mayor has not committed to doing so. Can you talk about why she would do that, given these decrepit conditions, and why is she, like, what reason has she given, and why is that reason wrong?
I'll start, and Jacki can jump in. And so she cited a few things, right? She, like many politicians, they cite violence, right? That we need the space to be able to arrest the bad people who are doing bad things in our city. Well, the truth is, even when both of these jails were full at capacity, violence had not stopped in the city of St. Louis. And we have elected a reform conscious prosecutor, Kim Gardner, who recently won re-election by over 60% of the vote. People want to see decarceration. They don't want to see people held in cages on bails that they cannot afford, or for charges that are low level, and they want to see the courts move faster to get these systems done. Our argument has always been we overinvest in jails. So for many years, the Workhouse's annual budget was $16 million. For comparison, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund of the city of St. Louis maxes out at $5 million. And consistently, until this previous budget cycle, it was underfunded each year. We spent twice as much, almost three times as much on a jail than we do on how much we invest into affordable housing as a city. And we are saying our priorities are off. We do not need two jails in this city, and that money is sitting on Hall Street when it could be being invested into the communities that we have talked about over the course of this interview. And so Lyda, again, was elected by a pro-police, pro-law and order demographic of people who live in the city. And so it would be a betrayal to her base to close the Workhouse. And we know that this is a political fight, that they have politicized this issue to stoke fears around crime and violence, which we know is inherently racist in this city. When you think about the fact that at any time when you look at our jail population, over 90% of the folks inside are Black. And so we have deep problems with her reasoning for not closing the jail. And so our hope is that the next administration actually steps into leadership and stops defaulting and kicking the ball down the road around these issues.
And just to follow up to that real quick, you mentioned two jails or two incarceration facilities. So I want to talk about that other one, because earlier this month, there was an uprising there. And people who were there were protesting the inhumane conditions during COVID. So can you talk a little bit about what you've heard from folks on the inside, what they're experiencing, and how this next mayor needs to address it?
I think what they're experiencing is horrific, and just the calls that we've received on our jail hotline at Arch City Defenders. No one should ever have to stay or live in those conditions. There's lack of access to water, to food. The temperatures are freezing during the depths of winter. This is not a way for anyone to be housed. And so what's happening is that people are frustrated. We're in the midst of a pandemic, and people are, when they are being tested, they're being thrown in with individuals who have not tested positive. And so there's no opportunity for people to know what's happening. There's no transparency. They don't understand their circumstances, and they're frustrated. And so what happens when you get frustrated is that you act. And so the city is using this as an opportunity to tell stories about what they want people to believe is happening in the jails. And they're using it as an opportunity to move people back and forth between CJC and the Workhouse to demonstrate why they believe that we need two jails in this city. And this situation only demonstrates that we need to be putting more money into caring for those folks in our community and getting people out of jail when they don't need to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jacki's being modest. Arch City Defenders filed a lawsuit many years ago about the unconstitutional bail practices inside of St. Louis City, and that resulted in higher courts condemning the bail practices of the city of St. Louis and forcing really the courts to act as they should and release more people on their own recognizance. And what we've seen since that decision has come down is that the city has actually asked for a stay. They can't operate the way that they should. So they've asked for a stay on that judgment. And now what we've seen is an increase like never before where folks are being denied bail altogether. And so we're keeping folks in jail as a response to the organizing and response to the legal advocacy of organizations like Arch City Defenders. And then what they're saying is, oh, well, we would close the workhouse, but this jail has too many people in it. And that is what led to the crisis. Well, that's not correct because, the public safety director, Jimmy Edwards, Mayor Crewsons, even President Lewis Reed, who introduced the bill that was supposed to close the workhouse by the end of 2020, has now recanted to say, because of COVID, we can't close this jail. Well, last time I checked, when the bill was introduced in July of 2020, we were in the height of COVID. And so when the Board of Aldermen voted unanimously on the bill, we were still in the height of COVID. And so COVID is not the excuse. It's a lack of leadership in the ability to develop a plan that actually will decarcerate our city and prioritize spending money on good things. And the other things I'll say is, there's a lot of articulation. Part of the reason that the Close the Workhouse campaign even started was because in 2017, there were protests at MSI at the workhouse, and now they're protests at CJC. And so both of these facilities have been inhumane. Both of these facilities have been subpar, and people have been punished. There's not any accountability or transparency around testing. And the only reason that we've even learned some new information is because those folks stood up and they protested, and they literally had to shatter windows for people on the outside to see what was happening inside of the jail. And so they shouldn't be condemned and they shouldn't be villainized as Public Safety Director Jimmy Edwards has done, because without their protests, many of us would not know what's going on inside of that facility. And so we are trying our best to get as much information as we can get. And what we're learning is that the city's not doing what they need to do. People are getting 4 masks every 2 weeks inside of that jail. There have only been, they said that 100 people have tested positive for COVID, but they've issued out less than 800 tests since the pandemic started. In a calendar year, they've only given out less than 800 tests and had 100 positive tests that they know of. There's no contact tracing. We don't know their quarantine protocols. They haven't released any plans around vaccinations. And we know that jails are hotspots for COVID. And so in part, yes, people are protesting because of COVID, but some of these conditions, like the lock situation where folks are able to get out of their cell to protest, that predated COVID. People who worked in that facility are saying the safety protocols have been off, and the city officials do not care. There is negligent leadership that needs to be held accountable for the ways in which we treat people, and we should not throw people away because they have been charged of a crime. And I will say this every single day: the people inside of these facilities have not been found guilty, and even if they had, they still have human rights. But they have not been found guilty. This is a pre-trial facility. Folks are waiting for their day in court, and we are condemning them to unsafe living situations and a virus that disproportionately kills Black people. And so if folks die inside of this jail, it is on the city's hands for their negligent responsibility, for their negligent actions.
So there are just so many things to respond to between what both of you just said. I mean, the first thing, by the way, Jacki, never refrain from bragging on this show. We love bragging. So thank you, Kayla, for bringing that up. But also the first thing I'm thinking when I hear about this response, which was to just remand people essentially and not set bail at all. It really shows just sort of a lack of leaders listening to the people when they say that we need decarceration. And particularly sort of this coupling claim from the mayor saying, well, we need to incarcerate more people because of violence. But then the response to quote unquote violence is to send people to decrepit facilities with no mental health care, where they're getting super sick and unable to take care of themselves just sort of shows the complete need for a whole mind shift that aligns with investing in people, as the both of you have said repeatedly in our fighting for. So thank you both for doing that. And it also makes me think sort of the larger movement in politics that we're seeing generally. So Kayla, we saw Congresswoman Cori Bush's historic victory over longtime Democratic Congressman Lacy Clay, who held the office for 2 decades after inheriting it essentially from his father in 2000. And this was largely due to the efforts of Black and brown voters and organizers in this city. So when we see so many folks not listening to Black and brown voters and organizers, how do you think that current mayoral candidates are looking at this past election and thinking, maybe we should do something different? Is it affecting their voter outreach strategies, or how is it affecting them overall?
Yeah, I think so. What we are seeing is the kind of status quo elected officials in the city of St. Louis and their wealthy donors coalesce around a Black candidate who has a moderate, political history. Some would even call it conservative, that has also prioritized the desires of those same corporate interests and wealthy folks in the city. So, when we think about endorsements just as a landscape analysis of who is backing which candidates, what we know is that candidates like Louis Reed, they've received the endorsement of the paper that often, the Post-Dispatch, which often attacks our campaign to close the Workhouse and stands against the organizations that signed the People's Plan. They've received the endorsement of the police. Louis Reed has received the endorsement of the police union. He's received the endorsement of the labor union. They have given him $100,000, and they want to see the airport privatized and the Workhouse remain open. And we know that in his previous campaigns, he's received dark money from private interests. Who we see endorsing other candidates like Tashara are the Fight for 15, the union that has fought for $15 in the union of service workers, reproductive justice organizations, others, mayors in the state of Missouri, the county executive, Sam Page, right, the prosecutor, Wesley Bell, racial justice organizations like the Organization for Black Struggle, historical Black newspapers like the St. Louis American. And so when you start to, even if we're just having a conversation on who's backing who, it seems that the folks who are advocating for the people, the everyday people and their well-being in this city, have coalesced around candidate Tashara Jones, where the private interests and those who are often responsible for some of the harm that's perpetuated against Black people have coalesced around candidate Louis Reed. And so again, I think people have to take into account that endorsements don't mean everything, right? And funding doesn't mean everything, but they are an indicator of who these folks will be accountable to and who people believe will be more receptive to their agendas. And the folks who we often are organizing on behalf of, those organizations have seemingly coalesced around candidate Tashara Jones, where a lot of the folks who are opposition to some of the issues that have been lifted up, some of the powerful grassroots campaigns that have stopped our airport from being privatized, that have seemed to push for this workhouse to be closed, the people who want to see those things happen have coalesced around candidate Louis Reed. And so I think that type of information needs to be broadcast to the electorate so that on March 2nd and April 6th, they walk into the ballot box understanding that we may end up with a Black mayor, which is historic, right? We've not had one in this century. The city has never had a Black woman be mayor. We've only had 2 Black men be mayor in all of the city's history in the 90s. But also what we know is that representation in race does not mean representation in ideas, right? And in vision. And people need to question the vision and the intent and the history of these candidates that are asking for our vote to become the next mayor of our city.
Well, you've certainly just broadcasted that message to many of the viewers who are watching this, which likely are some in St. Louis. So thanks for doing that.
Okay.
So, well, thank you so much, both of you, for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure, and good luck in all of your organizing over the next 2 months.
Thank you so much.
So St. Louis is preparing to have a real shift in their local government. They're preparing to elect a new mayor this spring. And we've seen, after years of a mayor who has failed to listen to the voices of the people who are most marginalized there, that there's a possibility to have a new mayor who re-envisions public safety, who is ready to make this city, make that city better by actually taking the community's demands seriously, to address the city's history of police violence, to invest in communities, to invest in housing, ensure that people who are unhoused are treated with dignity, fairness, and respect, and to heed the demands of the Black and Brown organizers that have been pushing for a better St. Louis. And so, with that being said, it'll be an interesting election to watch. But for now, that's all the time we have for today. You can continue to follow us on Appeal Live on Facebook and Twitter. In the meantime, I'm Alana Sivan. Thanks so much for joining us.